Picture this. You're standing at the divine bridge, that impossible span of ancient stone stretching out from Leyndell's outer walls, and for just a moment, the ever-present fog parts. Below you, the lands between spread out like a shattered mirror, each fragment reflecting a different light, a different power, a different dream of what this world should be. To the east, the sickly scarlet stain of Caelid festers like an open wound. To the west, the ethereal blue glow of Liurnia's moon-touched waters shimmer with arcane promise. North, the golden radiance of the Erdtree bathes everything in false comfort, while far to the south, in places most dare not speak of, darker powers gather in shadow and blood. Welcome, lore seekers, to another deep dive with Keen 7 lore, where today we're unraveling one of the most complex webs of political intrigue, territorial warfare, and ideological conflict ever crafted in a From Software game. The lands between aren't just a backdrop for our journey as Tarnished. They're a living battlefield where demigods, outer gods, and ancient powers vie for control over not just territory, but the very nature of existence itself. You see, when Queen Marika shattered the Elden Ring, she didn't just break a mystical artifact. She fractured an empire, unleashed competing ideologies that had been held in check by the Golden Order's iron grip, and gave every ambitious power in the realm a chance to reshape reality according to their own vision. The resulting chaos, what we call the Shattering, wasn't just a war. It was multiple wars, fought on multiple fronts, with alliances shifting like sand and betrayals cutting deeper than any blade. What makes Elden Ring's faction system so fascinating is how each group represents not just a military force or political entity, but a complete philosophical worldview. The Golden Order preaches perfection through regression and causality, mathematical laws that govern existence itself. The Carian royalty embraces the cold logic of the stars and the primeval current that flows through glintstone. The Volcano Manor rejects all gods entirely, choosing blasphemy and consumption as their path to power. Each faction believes with absolute conviction that their way is the only way forward for the lands between. And caught in the middle of all this, the common folk, the soldiers, the creatures who once lived in relative peace under the Erdtree's blessing. Now they're forced to choose sides, or, more often, they're simply swept up in conflicts they barely understand. You'll find Godric soldiers still patrolling Limgrave's roads, not knowing their lord has long since fallen to madness and grafting. Redmane knights continue their eternal vigil in Caelid, holding back the scarlet rot even as their general howls at the sky, consumed by the very corruption he fought to contain. This fractured state of the world isn't random chaos. It's carefully orchestrated devastation. Every border, every contested territory, every fortress and manor tells a story of how we got here, and more importantly, where the lands between might be heading. Today, we're going to walk through each of these territories, meet the powers that control them, understand their ideologies, and uncover the deep lore that explains why the world looks the way it does when we, as Tarnished, first set foot in it. Let's begin with the most obvious power, the one whose influence you can literally see from almost anywhere in the lands between. The Golden Order and their eternal capital of Leyndell. Even broken, even besieged, the Golden Order remains the dominant force in these lands, though their grip weakens with each passing day. The Golden Order's story begins not with Marika, but with her ascension to godhood and the fundamental change she brought to the nature of life and death itself. When Marika claimed the Elden Ring and became vessel for the greater will, she didn't just establish a new religion, she rewrote the rules of existence. Death, that most fundamental aspect of life, was removed from the Golden Order. The Rune of Death was plucked from the Elden Ring and given to Malekith, Marika's shadow, to guard for eternity. This single act would define everything that followed. If you're enjoying this deep dive so far, I'd genuinely appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. It makes a real difference in helping this video reach fellow lore enthusiasts through YouTube's algorithm. Your support means everything and helps keep these in-depth explorations coming. Under the Golden Order's rule, the lands between experienced what many considered a golden age. Godfrey, first Elden Lord, and Marika's consort, led campaigns of conquest that brought nearly every corner of the realm under the Erdtree's shadow. The war against the Giants, where the trolls betrayed their larger kin to serve the Golden Order, the defeat of the Stormlord by Godfrey himself, the subjugation of the dragons, leading to the dragon cult that would worship them even as it served the Erdtree. Each victory expanded not just territory, but ideological dominance. The Golden Order fundamentalists, those who study the Order's core principles most deeply, speak of two laws. The law of regression, which pulls all things toward their original state, and the law of causality, which states that all things are connected through cause and effect. These aren't just philosophical concepts. They're magical principles that fundamentalist incantations draw upon. Radagon himself, that mysterious figure who would become Elden Lord after Godfrey's banishment, was perhaps the greatest practitioner of these arts. But here's where things get interesting. The Golden Order's territorial control today is a shadow of its former glory. They still hold Leyndell, that eternal city that rises in terraced layers toward the Erdtree's base. The Altus Plateau remains nominally under their control, though pockets of resistance and rebellion fester everywhere. Parts of Limgrave pay lip service to the Golden Order, though Godric's grafted abominations have made a mockery of its principles. The military forces that maintain this control are themselves relics of different eras of the Golden Order's history. The Crucible Knights, those ancient warriors who served Godfrey himself, represent an older, more primal version of the Erdtree's power, one that embraced aspects of life that the current Golden Order considers impure. Their crucible incantations manifest bestial traits: wings, tails, horns, breath attacks. They're living reminders that the Golden Order's perfection is a relatively recent invention. Then you have the Tree Sentinels, mounted guardians who patrol the lands with their massive halberds and golden armor. These aren't just soldiers, they're symbols meant to remind everyone who sees them of the Erdtree's reach. The fact that we encounter one immediately upon entering Limgrave is no accident. It's a statement. These lands belong to the Golden Order, even if that order is crumbling. But perhaps the most tragic forces of the Golden Order are the Leyndell Knights themselves. These soldiers, resplendent in their tree motif armor, defend a city that's half empty, a capital whose god has abandoned it. They fight for Morgott, though they know him only as the Veiled Monarch, never realizing their king is an omen, one of the very beings their order considers cursed. The irony is crushing. The last true defender of the Golden Order is someone the Golden Order itself would reject. If you're finding value in this exploration so far, consider subscribing to support the channel and join our growing community of lore enthusiasts. Your support truly makes these deep investigations possible. The current state of the Golden Order's territory tells a story of denial and desperate holding actions. Leyndell itself is a fortress, its outer walls constantly under assault by the armies of those who would claim the throne. Inside, perfumers craft their deadly aromatics, preparing for sieges that may never come, or may come tomorrow. The minor Erdtrees scattered across the landscape stand as outposts of golden influence, each one a smaller reflection of the greater tree's power, each one slowly withering as the source of their strength fades. Moving west from the Golden Lands, we encounter a completely different philosophy of power, one that draws not from the earth and tree, but from the cosmos and moon. The Carian dynasty's control over Liurnia represents the greatest successful resistance to the Golden Order's expansion, a magical tradition that proved mighty enough to fight the forces of regression and causality to a standstill. The rise of the Carian royal family is inextricably linked to the establishment of Raya Lucaria Academy, that great institution of glintstone sorcery that predates even the Erdtree. When the astrologers of the ancient world looked to the Kodumema stars and found glintstone, crystallized star stuff that fell to earth, they discovered a source of power that needed no god, no faith, only intelligence and understanding. The academy they built to study these cosmic gifts would become the foundation of an entirely different world order. Ranni, Queen of the Full Moon, emerged from this tradition not just as a powerful sorceress, but as someone who encountered a celestial body itself. The full moon she discovered as a young woman would become both her mentor and her source of power, establishing a lunar monarchy that would rival the solar dominance of the Erdtree. Under her rule, the Carian family didn't just practice sorcery, they revolutionized it, creating spells of such devastating beauty that even the Golden Order's fundamentalists had to acknowledge their power. The Liurnian Wars, those great conflicts between the Carian forces and the armies of the Erdtree, ended not in conquest, but in marriage. When Radagon led his third assault on Raya Lucaria, something changed. The red-haired champion of the Golden Order, who had already earned fame fighting the giants, looked upon Ranni and saw not an enemy to defeat, but an equal to join with. Their union wasn't just political. By all accounts, it was a genuine love match, producing 3 children who would each become instrumental in the Shattering to come. But let's talk about the real military might of the Carians, those legendary 20 knights who served the royal family. These weren't armies of thousands, but individual warriors of such skill that each one was worth a battalion. The Carian knights wielded not just swords but sorcery, their techniques combining martial prowess with magical innovation. They created the famous phalanx spells, summoning spectral blades that would protect their casters while devastating their enemies. What's particularly fascinating is who could become a Carian knight. Unlike the rigid hierarchies of the Golden Order, the Carians judged worth by capability alone. Trolls, those massive beings who had betrayed the giants, found new purpose as Knights of Caria. Their natural strength combined with glintstone sorcery created warriors of terrifying power. You can still see them in the ruins of Caria Manor, their loyalty outlasting the dynasty they served. Today, Liurnia is a land divided against itself. When Radagon left Ranni to become Elden Lord, returning to Marika in a union that raises more questions than it answers, he shattered more than just the Queen's heart. The Academy turned against the royal family, sealing themselves behind their glintstone barriers and declaring independence from Carian rule. The result is a civil war that's been grinding on for generations. Academy mages against Carian loyalists, with the common people of Liurnia caught in between. The Academy controls Raya Lucaria itself and much of central Liurnia, their sorcerers maintaining a stranglehold on glintstone resources. But travel to the northwest, to the mist-shrouded Caria Manor, and you'll find the old power still very much alive. Here, the royal estate maintains its independence through a combination of magical defences and sheer reputation. The manor's hands, those grotesque giant hand creatures that patrol its grounds, are just the first line of defence. The real protection comes from the legacy of the Carian knights and the presence of individuals like Loretta. Loretta herself represents an interesting evolution of Carian ideology, a knight who sought to find a haven for the persecuted Albinarics. She initially served Carian before ultimately finding her way to the Haligtree. Her presence at the manor, even in spirit form, speaks to the Carians' more inclusive philosophy. They judge by merit and deed, not by birth or blessing. But the real power behind Carian now isn't found in the manor proper, but in the three sisters, those three towers that rise from the mists behind the estate. It's here that Ranni the Witch, daughter of Rennala and Radagon, orchestrates her elaborate conspiracy against the greater will itself. Her faction, working from the shadows, represents perhaps the most ambitious ideological challenge to the established order, not just resistance to the Golden Order, but a complete rejection of all outer god influence. The territories these factions control tell their own stories. The flooded ruins of Liurnia speak to some ancient catastrophe, perhaps related to the celestial event that brought glintstone to the world. The minor Carian outposts scattered across the region, from the study hall to various towers, each represent attempts to expand magical knowledge beyond the Academy's rigid structures. The artist's shack, where a spirit paints endless portraits of the Haligtree, hints at cultural traditions that transcended the political divide. Now, if we journey south from these contested magical lands, past the windmill villages and through the siege-scarred approaches to Mount Gelmir, we encounter a faction that rejects both faith and intelligence as paths to power. The Volcano Manor and its recusant faction represent something far more primal and disturbing: the complete consumption of the old order, literally and figuratively. Ricard's transformation into the god-devouring serpent wasn't a fall from grace. It was a deliberate choice, a conscious rejection of everything the Golden Order represents. As a son of Rennala and Radagon, Ricard had every advantage, every opportunity to claim power through conventional means. He was even granted a great rune during the Shattering, making him one of the shard-bearers with a legitimate claim to lordship. But Ricard wanted something more radical than simply replacing one god with another. The ideology of the recusants is blasphemy taken to its logical extreme. They don't seek to reform the Golden Order or establish a new covenant with different outer gods. They seek to devour the very concept of godhood, to consume the greater will and all its works until nothing remains but the serpent's endless hunger. It's nihilism with teeth, literally. Ricard's fused form with the god-devouring serpent is a nightmare of endless consumption, speaking in a voice that stretches words like tortured screams. Mount Gelmir itself is a natural fortress, a volcanic mountain whose molten rivers and toxic gases make conventional assault nearly impossible. The Golden Order has tried. You can find the remains of their siege equipment scattered across the mountain's approaches, along with the bodies of countless soldiers who discovered that faith offers little protection against lava. The abductor virgins, those mechanical monstrosities that patrol the manor's territory, represent a different kind of warfare entirely, one that relies on technology and brutality rather than blessings or sorcery. Inside the manor itself, we find a peculiar kind of civilization. Under Lady Tanith's leadership, and she continues to lead even after Ricard's defeat, in her own disturbing way, the Volcano Manor operates as an assassination cult targeting the tarnished, who would become Elden Lord. Every contract they issue, every bloody finger invasion, is aimed at preventing anyone from restoring the old order or establishing a new one. They're not trying to win the Game of Thrones. They're trying to burn the board entirely. The recusant philosophy attracts a particular kind of follower. Bernal, the former Elden Lord candidate, whose maiden threw herself into the fire but failed to kindle, found in the manor's blasphemy an answer to his disillusionment. The various bloody finger initiates who serve the manor aren't just assassins. They're true believers in the cause of cosmic rebellion. Even the serpentine creatures that infest Mount Gelmir seem to understand they're part of something greater, or perhaps lesser, than simple survival. What's particularly interesting about the Volcano Manor's territorial control is how it functions through fear rather than governance. They don't tax the villages at the mountain's base or establish governmental structures. Instead, they create zones of terror where the old rules simply don't apply. The windmill villages that dot the approaches to the manor have descended into madness, their inhabitants dancing endlessly in celebrations that have lost all meaning. Whether this is direct influence from the manor or simply what happens when traditional order collapses is unclear, but the effect is the same: chaos that serves the serpent's purposes. Moving eastward from Miquella across the war-torn span of the Altus Plateau, we encounter perhaps the most tragic of all the major factions, the Redmane Legion, and their eternal vigil in the Scarlet hellscape of Caelid. Unlike the other factions we've discussed, the Redmanes aren't fighting for ideology or conquest. They're simply trying to hold the line against a corruption that threatens to consume the entire world. General Radahn, mightiest of the Demigod children, earned his title Star Scourge through his mastery of gravity magic, learned in Celia from the Alabaster Lords who fell from the void. His power was so great that he could hold back the very stars, freezing celestial fate itself in place. But all that strength, all that cosmic might, proved barely enough when he faced Malenia and her Scarlet Rot in the Battle of Aeonia. The battle between Radahn and Malenia represents the Shattering at its most destructive. Two of the mightiest demigods, each wielding power that could reshape landscapes, met in Caelid and fought to a standstill. When Malenia, pressed to her limits, unleashed the Scarlet Rot that had plagued her since birth, she didn't just wound Radahn. She corrupted an entire region. The blooming of the Scarlet Aeonia transformed Caelid from a coastal territory of decent prosperity into the nightmarish wasteland we encounter in the game. The Redmane Legion's response to this catastrophe reveals their character. Rather than flee, rather than abandon their general and their territory, they adapted. They established a defensive perimeter, using fire to hold back the rot's spread. They developed techniques and equipment specifically designed to combat the corruption. Most remarkably, they maintained their discipline and hierarchy even as their general descended into madness, consumed by the very rot he had fought to contain. Redmane Castle, perched on Caelid's southern coast, stands as one of the most impressive military fortifications in the lands between. Its defenders have turned what should be a hopeless situation into a grim stability. The castle's famous festival, where warriors from across the lands gather to grant Radahn an honorable death, represents a kind of military compassion that's rare in these fractured lands. They know their general is beyond saving, but they also know he's too dangerous to simply abandon. So they've created a ritualized solution, one that honors Radahn's legacy while acknowledging the necessity of his death. The regular Redmane soldiers, those who patrol Caelid's scarlet-stained wastes, deserve special recognition. These aren't fanatics driven by religious fervor or ambitious warriors seeking glory. They're professional soldiers doing an impossible job because someone has to. They fight the rot-mutated creatures that spawn endlessly from the corruption. They maintain supply lines through territory where the air itself is poisonous. They stand watch on walls that overlook vistas of pure horror, and they do it day after day, year after year. The territorial situation in Caelid is unique among the game's regions. The Redmanes don't really control Caelid so much as they contain it. Their forts and flame barriers create islands of relative safety in an ocean of corruption. Fort Gael in the south, the minor forts scattered across the region, each represents a desperate holding action against entropy itself. The fact that merchants still dare to travel Caelid's roads, that any form of civilization persists here at all, is testament to the Redmane's dedication. But let's talk about what they're actually fighting. The Scarlet Rot isn't just a disease or a poison, it's an outer god's influence made manifest, a force of decay that seeks to reduce everything to fundamental rot. The creatures it spawns, from the massive rot-infected dragons to the tiny basilisks with their death-blight breath, represent corruption taking on life of its own. The kindred of rot, those insectoid pests that worship the rot as divine, have established their own colonies throughout Caelid, adding a religious dimension to what might otherwise be seen as simple contamination. Commander O'Neill and his exile soldiers in the swamp of Aeonia represent another facet of this conflict. These aren't Redmanes, but veterans of other conflicts who found themselves trapped in Caelid's corruption. They've adapted differently, some even embracing the rot as a weapon, using its power even as it consumes them. It's a reminder that in the lands between, survival often means compromise with forces that will ultimately destroy you. Hidden far to the north, past the sacred grounds of Ordina, and through the veils of concealment that hide it from unworthy eyes, stands perhaps the most idealistic faction's territory, Miquella's Haligtree, and the city of Elphael it supports. This isn't just another demigod's power base. It's an attempt to create something genuinely new, a haven for all those the Golden Order rejects. Miquella the Kind, cursed with eternal youth but blessed with intellect that surpasses perhaps even his mother's, understood something fundamental. The Golden Order, for all its talk of perfection, was built on exclusion. The omens, the albinorics, the tarnished, those touched by crucible aspects, all were deemed impure, unworthy of grace. Miquella's Haligtree was meant to be their sanctuary, a new Erdtree that would welcome all. The creation of the Haligtree itself was an act of incredible ambition. Unable to make it grow through conventional means, the Greater Will's influence prevented any competing tree from reaching maturity. Miquella watered it with his own blood, feeding it his essence drop by drop. The resulting tree, while never reaching the Erdtree's size, became something unique, a world tree independent of outer god influence, at least in theory. Elphael, the city built in the Haligtree's boughs, represents architectural and social engineering on a scale that rivals Leyndell itself. Its spiraling towers and branch-woven walkways create a vertical city where albinorics, misbegotten, and even reformed Crystalians could live in relative peace. The fact that it's hidden behind multiple layers of protection, the consecrated snowfields obscuring blizzards, the liturgical town of Ordina's trials, the secret medallion system, speaks to both its value and vulnerability. But the Haligtree's story is ultimately one of tragedy. Miquella's cocooning ritual, his attempt to break his curse and achieve true godhood that could challenge the Greater Will, was interrupted by Mohg's abduction. Without Miquella's presence, without his blood feeding the tree, the Haligtree began to wither. The citizens of Elphael, those who had travelled so far seeking sanctuary, found themselves trapped in a dying paradise. This is where Millennia's story becomes even more heartbreaking. The blade of Miquella, undefeated in battle until her encounter with Radahn, waits eternally in Elphael for a brother who will never return, or at least, not in the way she expects. Her clean rot knights, those warriors who chose to serve her despite knowing the rot would eventually claim them, maintain their vigil over a kingdom whose king is absent and whose promise is fading. The unalloyed gold that Miquella developed represents one of the most significant innovations in the game's cosmology. This pure gold, untouched by outer god influence, could halt the Scarlet Rot's advance and potentially resist other divine corruptions. The needle Miquella crafted for millennia, and the one we can have reforged, prove that it was possible to resist the outer god's influence through mortal ingenuity alone. That this technology remains largely confined to the Haligtree speaks to how closely Miquella guarded his secrets. Speaking of secrets and hidden powers, we must descend now into the darkness beneath the earth, to a dynasty built on blood and ambition. The Mohgwyn Palace, hidden in a pocket of underground space, accessible only through blood-soaked portals or secret medallions, represents the antithesis of Miquella's inclusive paradise. Mohg, Lord of Blood, is perhaps the most purely ambitious of all the shard-bearers. Born an omen, cursed and shunned by the Golden Order despite his royal blood, Mohg found in the Formless Mother an outer god who valued what the Erdtree rejected. The accursed blood that marked him as an outcast became, under the Formless Mother's influence, a source of incredible power. The Mohgwyn dynasty that Mohg seeks to establish isn't just about personal power, it's about fundamental transformation of what divinity means in the lands between. By stealing Miquella and attempting to elevate him to godhood through blood rituals, Mohg hopes to become consort to a new god, establishing a new age where blood, not gold, flows from the divine tree. It's a perverse mirror of Marika's original ascension, twisted through the lens of omen curse and blood magic. The palace itself is an architectural impossibility, a massive underground complex that shouldn't exist where it does. Built in a style that predates the Erdtree, all sharp angles and blood-red stone, it feels ancient, despite being relatively new. The blood swamp that surrounds it isn't just decoration, but a functional part of the dynasty's power. Each drop of blood, spilled, they're feeding the Formless Mother's influence. The bloody fingers who serve Mohg represent a different kind of invasion covenant than anything else in the game, while Volcano Manor's recusants seek to prevent anyone from becoming Elden Lord. The bloody fingers actively recruit tarnished to their cause. Vare's quest line, which serves as many players' introduction to the dynasty, is a masterpiece of manipulation, slowly drawing the player deeper into blood-soaked rituals until they're marked by the Formless Mother herself. What's particularly disturbing about Mohgwyn Palace's territory is how it exists in parallel to the normal world. The palace sits beneath Caelid, yet it's not part of the underground river system that connects Siofra and Ainsel. It's a pocket dimension sustained by blood sacrifice, growing stronger with each kill made in its name. The Albinarics farmed there for their blood represent the dynasty's fundamental cruelty. These beings who sought sanctuary from persecution have become literal fuel for another tyrant's ambitions. Beyond these major factions, the lands between host numerous smaller powers and contested territories, each adding complexity to the already fractured political landscape. These minor factions might lack the military might of the Redmanes or the territorial control of the Golden Order, but their influence on the world's fate could prove just as significant. The Frenzied Flame Cultists, those who serve the Three Fingers and seek the return of the One Great, represent perhaps the most extreme ideology in the entire game. They don't want to rule the world or transform it. They want to burn it all away, returning everything to the primordial chaos that existed before distinction and disparity. The Frenzied Flame isn't just another outer god seeking influence. It's the antithesis of existence itself, offering an ending where everything burns until only ash remains. The merchants, those nomadic traders we encounter throughout our journey, carry a terrible secret. Their ancestors were buried alive beneath Leyndell, accused of heresy by the Golden Order. In their despair, they called out to the only power that would answer, the Frenzied Flame. The result was the creation of the Three Fingers and the establishment of a power that threatens everything. Every merchant we meet carries this generational trauma, and some have given into it, their eyes blazing with yellow flame as they play their instruments in lonely ruins. The Round Table. Hold operates as something unique in this fractured world. a genuinely neutral ground where tarnished of all allegiances can gather. Under the Two Fingers guidance, at least initially, it serves as a hub for those seeking to restore the Golden Order, but even this neutrality is an illusion. The hold exists outside normal space, accessible only through sites of grace, and its very existence depends on the Greater Will's waning influence. As that influence fades, so too does Sed, the hold, until by the game's end it's burning, abandoned, a relic of an order that no longer exists. Castle Saul, in the mountaintops of the Giants, represents another fascinating micro-faction. Commander Niall and his forces aren't aligned with any major power, but instead pursue their own agenda, attempting to trigger an eclipse that might restore Godwyn's soul to his body. The failure of this ritual, the eclipse that never came, has left Sol in a state of perpetual readiness for something that may be impossible. Niall's exile soldiers, veterans of wars we never learn about, maintain their discipline in service to a cause that's already failed. The Fire Monks present an interesting case of religious syncretism. Originally servants of the fell god of the Giants, they were absorbed into the Golden Order after Marika's victory, but allowed to maintain their flame-tending duties. They guard the Flame of Ruin, the very power that could destroy the Erdtree, making them both servants and potential destroyers of the Golden Order. Their presence throughout the mountaintops, and even in Liurnia, shows how the Golden Order sometimes incorporated, rather than eliminated, rival beliefs. Godric's forces in Limgrave deserve special mention as an example of how far a faction can fall, while still maintaining territorial control. Godric the Grafted, weakest of the Shard-bearers and most pathetic of the demigods, rules through fear and body horror rather than strength or conviction. His grafting practices, stealing the strength of others to add to his own twisted form, represent a corruption of the Crucible's life-mixing properties. His soldiers follow him not out of loyalty, but because the alternative, being grafted onto their lord, is worse than servitude. Kenneth Haight's claim to Limgrave adds another layer to this territorial complexity. As self-proclaimed rightful ruler of the region, Kenneth represents the old nobility trying to restore pre-Shattering order. His quest to find a true lord for Limgrave, someone of proper lineage who can restore legitimate rule, shows how some still believe the old systems can be restored despite all evidence to the contrary. The recent shadow of the Erdtree revelations have completely recontextualized our understanding of these territorial conflicts. The Land of Shadow, that hidden realm where Marika conducted her brutal ascension to godhood, shows us that the current factional violence is just the latest iteration of cycles that have repeated throughout history. Messmer the Impaler's crusade against the Hornsent reveals the genocidal foundation upon which the Golden Order was built. This is an ancient history. Messmer's forces still prosecute their eternal war in the Land of Shadow, hunting down the indigenous people who once ruled where the Erdtree now stands. The Hornsent's jar rituals, their tower civilization, their own forms of divinity, all were systematically destroyed to make way for Marika's age of the Tsetenta, Erdtree. The revelation that Miquella travelled to the Land of Shadow to achieve godhood adds new dimensions to the Haligtree faction's goals. His abandonment of Saint Trina, his other self who represented love and compassion, shows that even the kindest demigod was willing to sacrifice everything for power. The fact that he chose Redmane as his consort, going so far as to have millennia fight him to ensure his death and rebirth, reveals layers of manipulation we're only beginning to understand. County Mear's presence and his revelations about the cosmic fingers, that both the 2 fingers and 3 fingers are flawed, broken aspects of something greater, suggest that every faction in the lands between is operating on incomplete information. They're all fighting for visions of the world based on fractured divine guidance, making their conflicts not just political, but cosmological in nature. As we stand back and view this vast territorial and ideological battlefield, patterns begin to emerge. Every faction, from the mightiest demigod's army to the smallest cult, is trying to answer the same fundamental question. What should the world become in the absence of true divine order? The Golden Order promises a return to stability through regression to causality. The Carians offer advancement through cosmic understanding. The Haligtree promised inclusion and unity. The Frenzied Flame offers the finality of universal destruction. But here's what's truly fascinating. None of these factions can win through military might alone. The Redmanes can't defeat the rot with swords. The Golden Order can't restore faith through force. The Volcano Manor can't devour gods with blasphemy alone. Victory in the lands between requires not just territorial control, but ideological supremacy, the ability to convince the world that your vision of reality is the correct one. This is where we, as Tarnished, enter the picture. We're not just wandering murderers collecting great runes. We're the ultimate arbiters of which ideology will shape the future. Every ending available to us represents victory for a different faction's worldview. Restoring the Golden Order validates Morgott's desperate defense. Choosing the stars validates Ranni's rejection of outer influence. Embracing the Frenzied Flame gives victory to forces even the most blasphemous factions fear. The territories these factions control aren't just strategic resources. They're testing grounds for different visions of existence. Liurnia's magical academies explore what knowledge without faith can achieve. Caelid's corruption shows what happens when outer god influence goes unchecked. The Haligtree's withering demonstrates the fragility of utopian dreams. Each region tells a story not just about what is, but about what could be. The common people caught between these powers face impossible choices. Serve the Golden Order and accept their definition of perfection, flaws and all. Join the Academy and reduce everything to cold intelligence. Follow the blood dynasties into sacrifice and transformation. Or simply try to survive in the spaces between, those villages and settlements that exist in the margins of great powers' attention. The wandering merchants, the isolated villages, the hermits in their shacks. They've all found different ways to navigate this fractured world. What makes Elden Ring's faction system so compelling is that there are no clear good guys. Every faction has legitimate grievances. The Golden Order really did bring stability and prosperity, even if built on exclusion and lies. The Volcanic Manor's blasphemy is a response to genuine divine tyranny. Even Mohg's blood dynasty emerges from the systematic persecution of omens. These aren't simple evil armies, but complex political entities shaped by history, trauma, and radically different visions of what divinity should mean. Looking at the game's endings through this territorial lens adds new meaning to our choices. The Age of Fracture maintains the status quo, leaving these territorial divisions in place. The Age of Stars removes outer god influence, but also removes guidance, leaving mortals to determine their own fate. The Age of Order perfects the Golden Order's laws, potentially eliminating the contradictions that created these conflicts. The Frenzied Flame ending makes all territorial disputes moot by burning everything to fundamental ash. The genius of this design is that it makes every playthrough a political statement. Which factions you help, which you destroy, which NPCs you save or sacrifice, all of these choices align you with different ideological positions. You're not just choosing gameplay rewards, but actively participating in the ideological warfare that defines the lands between. As we near the end of this deep dive into the factions and territories of Elden Ring, I want to take a moment to appreciate the sheer ambition of what From Software has created here. This isn't just a collection of enemy types with different coloured armour. It's a fully realised political landscape where every border tells a story, every castle represents ideological conflict, and every faction believes they're the heroes of their own story. The lands between, in their current shattered state, mirror our own world's complexities. How do societies rebuild after catastrophic collapse? Can ideological differences be resolved through anything other than violence? Is it better to restore old orders or build something entirely new? These aren't just fantasy questions. They're fundamental human concerns dressed in the language of gods and demigods. Thank you so much for joining me on this extensive exploration of Elden Ring's political landscape. The depth and complexity of these factions, their territories, and their competing ideologies represent some of the finest world-building in gaming history. Every detail, from the smallest merchant caravan to the mightiest demigod's army, contributes to a living world where our choices as players genuinely matter. If you've made it through this entire deep dive, you've proven yourself a true lore seeker, someone who understands that the best stories in gaming aren't just told through cutscenes, but embedded in the very geography of the world. Please consider subscribing if you haven't already. Your support makes these extensive investigations possible and helps build our community of players who hunger for deeper understanding. Remember, the next time you stride across Limgrave's fields or navigate Lanedel's golden streets, you're not just traversing a game map. You're walking through active war zones where competing ideologies clash, where every fortress represents someone's vision of what the world should become, and where your choices will ultimately determine which faction's dreams become reality. Whether you restore the Golden Order's rigid perfection, embrace the Star's cold freedom, or burn it all away in frenzied flame, you're participating in one of gaming's most complex political narratives. Until next time, fellow Tarnished. This has been Keen 7 Lore, reminding you that in the lands between, every border is a battleground. Every territory tells a tale, and every faction believes they alone can save a world that may be beyond salvation. May you find your own path through these fractured lands, and may the ideology you choose bring the resolution these eternal conflicts desperately need.